You're listening to Titular Characters with your host, the adorable Eva Webb.
Let's talk nerdy things like comic books and superheroes with some nerdy peeps, writers, cartoonists, and so much more. Stick around and have some fun with the lovely and adorable Eva Webb.
Samuel George London is a comic book writer from the UK who's best known for his self-published Victorian space adventures series, Milford Green. Recently, though, he's had a 4-issue miniseries published by Action Lab titled The S Factor, which is about the dark underbelly of superhero dating reality TV shows. And today, we're going to talk to him about comics. So, Sam, where does your creative journey begin?
Yeah, my creative journey, gosh. So I grew up in a county in the UK called Berkshire, and that's just west of London. And it's kind of like a proper leafy suburb of London, really, as leafy as you can imagine. And in my younger years, I was quite creative. I did like to try and come up kind of with my own stories, just kind of, a combination of prose and even poems as well, and things like that. But it was mainly kind of, trying to attempt to tell a story. But I never really took it beyond my own bedroom, my own diary, really. So it never went anywhere. And then, I didn't really have anything creative going on for probably about 10 years during my 20s, where, I don't know, I was just focused on being a young person, trying to live it up, I guess, going out and drinking and all that jazz. Then when I hit my 30s and, I got married and started a family and things, started settling down, then I started getting back into being creative. And the one thing that happened in kind of my early 30s rather, was that the Walking Dead came out on TV, and I saw that and I thoroughly enjoyed the first season, and I found out that it was based on a comic, and I thought that's really interesting, because I never knew you could do comics like that. And so I hunted it down. And when I hunted it down, it turned out that they were at about issue 140, I think. So I managed to get the first 3 compendiums and blast through 140 issues pretty quickly, which was amazing. And then kind of from that, I read other works by Robert Kirkman, and that led me on to the likes of kind of Mark Millar and Grant Morrison, and the whole kind of, British cabal, basically, that we exported to everywhere within the comics industry. But a couple of years of kind of reading comics at large, I thought, you know what, I'd like to try and tell stories again. And so I started trying to jot down some ideas. And the first one I actually came up with was my most recent Kickstarter, which was called Band of Warriors, which is kind of a tale based in the Bronze Age, and it's going to mix Greek and Celtic mythology. But that wasn't actually the first story that I put out to the world. The first story that I put out to the world was my Victorian space adventure series called Milford Green, which is exactly that. It's kind of when an alien spacecraft crash lands in a Victorian village in southern England. And that's probably the series that I'm best known for. Since then, I've had other titles released called Access Denied fairly recently, which is kind of like a take on Romeo and Juliet, but with humans on Earth and androids on Mars, which is interesting. And then also I've had a 4-issue miniseries published through Action Lab called The S Factor, which is about the dark underbelly of a superhero TV reality dating show, which I think is a lot of fun. And that's actually coming out kind of in print because it's only been published digitally so far because of, the pesky pandemic that's been going on. But it's actually going to be published on print through the summer from June. So I'm looking forward to kind of seeing how that does as well.
That's awesome. So you totally anticipated my what do you have going on question. That's pretty cool.
Sorry if I jumped the gun there.
Oh no, you're totally fine. That's you at least got it in like the exact spot it should have been in, so that works out. So I'm just curious, like when you're writing comics, do you have a ritual or something you do to get yourself in the right space for creating?
Yeah, it's really interesting that in terms of trying to create some sort of routine or just like a little affirmation or something to get you going. And I think perhaps in my younger years, I might have needed that. But since having kind of a young family with a young child, you learn to just make things happen when you've got the time, really. So these days, I don't actually have anything specific to get me going, as long as I can close the door, as Stephen King would say, and literally as well, close the door to my office and just put my headphones on. I generally write to music, but instrumental music only, no lyrics. And I tend to listen. There's a band, although I think it's actually just one person. He's an electronic musician called Tycho. That's Tycho, who does this just really kind of beautiful chill out music that I find really kind of helpful for writing with too. But as long as I've kind of got an hour or two ahead of me, blocked out with no distractions or anything like that, then, I can just sit down at a computer and kind of just get going, really.
So when you held your first comic that you published in your hands, what went through your head?
Yeah, that was a really exciting day, actually. So as I mentioned before, the first one that I had published was Milford Green, and that was all through Kickstarter. And it was my first Kickstarter, so I didn't know exactly what to expect. I tried to plan as much as I could based on kind of other people's advice, which was mainly on blogs. But when I got the first box of copies through for Milford Green, I was so excited. Because obviously I'd been working with the artist Michael Hankinen to create the actual comic itself, and seeing the pages come through in all of their forms, from the pencils, inks and colors, it was just, that was very exciting seeing that. But then holding it in my hand physically, I was just over the moon, and kind of just giddy. Really, you just kind of see, wow, I've actually created a story, and I got even more excited actually when I kind of posted out all of the rewards to everybody, and I started seeing people post pictures on Twitter about it. So that was really exciting that, you know, people loved the story and kind of the look and the feel of the whole thing. That got me really excited, just hearing that people enjoyed it and kind of thought that it was a good quality product as well.
So when you create, where do you find your zen?
Where do I find my zen? Sorry, Eva.
Yes, where do you find your
My zen. That's a good question. I think it really is kind of, as long as I'm going to rethink that just quickly. So finding my zen kind of for creative ideas, really, it almost pounces on me, my ideas. It's about getting started with kind of a gem of an idea, like a germ of an idea, sorry. And once you have that, you know, small little seed of an idea, then it's about trying to develop it. And I almost allow that initial seed of an idea to come to me. And then, unfortunately, my mind kind of subconsciously works on it. And then I wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning with a breakthrough in terms of how can I actually create a story from that seed of an idea. So I'd say my zen almost comes at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm kind of, you know, just lying in bed, attempting to go back to sleep, but my mind is kind of away with the fairy, so to speak.
Is there a particular emotional place you write from?
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think on my first few stories, I didn't really think about that too much. But then people that knew me started pointing out certain things in the stories, which is really interesting. So the first thing to kind of mention is that my father died when I was 8. He took his own life, which obviously had a profound effect on myself and my entire family. And when one of my best friends read my Milford Green, he was wondering, you know, is this kind of, there's a character in the story that dies, and he's like, is this kind of like an allegory for for your father a little bit? I was like, maybe it is, you know, and kind of that's almost a bit of a repeating theme for me. I'm much like a Disney movie in that way, where a mentor type character kind of ends up dying at some point. And that might be kind of connected to the loss of my father. But then also at the same time, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was 13, which is a cancer. But if you catch it early enough, it's quite survivable. And I managed to have 4.5 months of chemo when I was 13, and I was all clear by the end. But kind of having that kind of early experience of the potential of dying, I think kind of has a bit of a reflection on my stories of hope for the future, I think. So even though at first I didn't really kind of think about, am I writing this from this angle? I just wrote, and I guess subconsciously kind of those experiences came out in the stories themselves.
How do your characters find their voices?
Yeah, that's another really interesting question, because I think at the start, it's really difficult for kind of a rookie writer to try and, you know, get it spot on the first go, in terms of trying to differentiate the voices more and more. I think as you go through the Milford Green series, I think you see my writing develop from being able to kind of write better dialogue and create better voices for the characters themselves. And I think hopefully you can see that improvement in my other writing as well, that the characters have much different voices. But a lot of the different voices obviously comes from my own experience of dealing with lots of different people, and trying to understand their experiences and kind of the way that they think. And, particularly for female characters, I really lean on my mum. So obviously my mum lost her husband, kind of when my brothers and sisters, my brother and sisters, were fairly young. And so, growing up with a single mother, kind of, I don't know, teaches you that women are very strong, and that, I think having that experience kind of really taught me how people can be different. Because obviously, not obviously, but all of my other friends, had both parents and seemingly happy and things, and my experience was kind of very different, being in a single parent household, and so she having to kind of basically do everything, with help now and again and things. But it's really kind of from those types of experiences that I lean on when I've got a particular character. So, for instance, Mary Wells, who's the main female character in the Milford Green series, she's in a very destructive relationship at the start, and by the end, she is a very strong and independent woman. And kind of, I tried to have that trajectory in my mind, like throughout the series, and I always lent on kind of what would my mum say at this point, and kind of baking that into the mix, I think, is where it all comes from.
It's interesting that you're talking about it in those terms. How do you approach the topic of diversity and representation in your writing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think it's about, where it's appropriate, and where it feels right as well. Now, so for instance, with Milford Green, that's based in Victorian England, and so basically all of the human characters that are in England at the time are basically all white. But then kind of down the road, what we do is that with the final installment, it becomes a global thing. And so you've got people from India and kind of even Aboriginal Australians coming in as well into the fold, because we managed to make it global. And so it was about, because the story went that way, those groups came into the story naturally. And so that was that. But then on the flip side, with my story, The S Factor, which is the superhero dating reality TV show story, that's set in modern day. So the kind of the populations are a lot more diverse and a lot more kind of naturally diverse. And so the main character, who's mixed race, because in London specifically, there's a lot of mixed race people, because it's a big melting pot of races in London, and so it's likely that somebody would be mixed race, kind of in that position. And then the female contestants that are trying to win the heart of the main character there, they're from all around the world. And so I was able to kind of have a really diverse cast there, from, again, an Aboriginal Australian, and also somebody from India as well, and everybody basically, which was absolutely fantastic to put in. So I think kind of my bottom line with diversity is, just think about kind of the time and place in which you're set, and create natural diversity, I think.
So what kind of writer would you say you are? Are you the type of writer that meticulously plans every detail, or do you just start writing and go?
That's a great question. So when I was researching writing before I started Milford Green, one of the writers that I watched basically every YouTube video under the sun of George R.R. Martin talking about writing, which was really, really useful. He says some real kind of gems of advice in a lot of the YouTube videos that you can find, and just these 5-minute clips that people have put together, which is an absolute godsend. And he talks about the fact that there are architects and gardeners when it comes to writing. And obviously a gardener is somebody that kind of just lets the story grow as you go, that kind of thing. And then you've got architects that plan everything meticulously, as you were saying there. And of course, you're not going to have somebody that's just an architect and just a gardener. There's a kind of a spectrum between the two. But I definitely lean more towards the architect side of that spectrum. And that's mainly because I feel like I need that structure before I delve into the script itself. And so what I do is that when I've got that seed of an idea, then I try to fit it into an 8-point story arc. And I use this 8-point story arc from I found out about it from kind of a video, or was it on a podcast? It might have been on a podcast, where Dan Harmon, the co-creator of Rick and Morty and Community, the TV show, talks about using his golden circle, which is this 8-point story arc, on how to create a satisfying story. And I use that as kind of a scaffolding to try and plot out what the story is generally going to look like, kind of what the beats are, and kind of create a character journey as well within that will be satisfying for the reader. And I do that before I delve into the script. And then once I've got that 8-point story arc, then I delve right into the script writing. But then at the same time, as I'm going through, little storylines might kind of grow off of that. So you could say that, I've got a well-structured house, but I've probably got some ivy growing on the side.
How do you make a collaboration work? What does a good collaboration look like?
That is a great question. And what's been really interesting is that I've had a few different experiences working with artists. But my first collaboration was with the magnificent Michael Hankinen, who's the artist for the Milford Green series and also most recently Access Denied, with myself. And he is a total pro. We've got constant communication through Twitter DM, so we're always going back and forth on direct message in terms of kind of fine tuning things. But he kind of lays out a schedule and kind of gives me a heads up if he's having to take a few days off because of anything that comes up and things like that. But then also, he'll send me all of the pencils up front. And, for instance, for the first Milford Green book, which is 40 pages long, he did all 40 pages, just the pencils, in 2 weeks, which was wild. I was like, wow, this seems quick. And I later find out that it's really quick. And then once we've kind of got a feel for the layout and things like that of all of the pages, then he went straight into the inking and colouring. And, he'd generally do about one page a day in terms of the inking and the colouring. But he'd send them at the end of the week. Then I'd give him feedback, and then he'd be able to either update over the weekend if he's got time, or the following week on the pages. And I think just the key really is just constant communication. And it's difficult because it might not work for every single artist. But, as a writer, those are the type of people that I want to be working with again and again, is the ones that are, in constant communication with you, trying to make sure that my vision of what I want is getting across to the artist. But then, equally, the artist can kind of come back and say, I'm not sure that's going to work so well, which has happened, so many times. And it's like, well, the artist usually gets it right, in terms of, the perspective or the panel flow and things like that. And it's fantastic to kind of have that collaboration in terms of all of that. But if you want to be an artist to work with, constant communication, and kind of give your collaborators a heads up if you're not going to be able to work for a certain period of time and things like that. I think those are the main things.
Did the artists ever surprise you?
Surprise me in a good way or a bad way?
Either
one.
Both?
Yeah, both. Well, I mean, artists have surprised me loads. In terms of I didn't see that type of thing. They might add something to the page, or they might add an extra panel. Which has happened many a time, both in Milford Green, also in Access Denied with Michael, but also in one of my other projects, which is an all ages horror comic called Project Hoax, which is kind of like a British version of Stranger Things, but set in the 90s rather than the 80s. The artist for that, Dan Butcher, did some really good reworking of some of the pages in terms of the paneling. Kind of gave it an extra panel, and it makes such a difference, and obviously as the writer, it can sometimes be difficult to envisage everything, but when the artist kind of takes over and they have the vision in their head and add that panel, then it's fantastic to see, because it's like you're making it so much better than I did. But then also at the same time, I've had not many, just one or two bad experiences where somebody just wasn't getting it right, and that's difficult because they're working as hard as they can, the artist, but you just keep on having to go back to say, oh, I really don't like that bit. Can we change it, type of thing. But thankfully that doesn't happen too often.
So you've actually done quite a bit of world building in your books. What is the genesis of that? Where do you start with building a world?
Gosh, yeah, it's so difficult world building, isn't it? Trying to map out how it's all going to look, and I think probably one of the best places to start is almost imitation. And that goes the same with almost any creative process, is that you start off with imitation until you yourself can innovate. And so it doesn't have to kind of be an exact carbon copy type thing, but you just have to look at good examples of what world building are. And for me, when I was doing Milford Green, one of the best worlds that have ever been built is Star Trek, for me. And I just kind of looked at that and thought, Roddenberry obviously kind of nailed it out of the park with Star Trek. Kind of borrowing elements from that and trying to kind of make it your own is what I tried to do with some of that. And I think kind of as I get more and more experienced, I'm hoping that, I am going to be able to be an innovator rather than an imitator. But we've all got to kind of start somewhere, and, borrowing little bits and changing it, I think is generally okay. But in terms of people that are out there listening to this, just look at good examples and kind of somewhat base it off of that, inspired from good examples is what I'd say.
Is there any commonality to the worlds that your characters inhabit?
That is interesting. I'd love it if somebody could read through all of my work and see if there are any commonalities. That'd be really interesting. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I can only assume that kind of subconsciously that perhaps there is. I'd probably say the most common thing is kind of having a mentor within the story. And of course, that's not just me, that's a very common story element to include. But definitely a mentor character that tries to kind of show the main character the right way to do things is what I try to do. I think that's probably the most common theme throughout my stories, I think, definitely.
So what's the secret sauce? What makes a book by Samuel George London special? What makes it stand out?
That's a great question, and one I wish I could answer. Perhaps my readership could answer that for me, but I think perhaps my secret sauce is hope for a better future, I think. And perhaps that's kind of going back to your previous questions in terms of a commonality, is that's probably what I'm trying to get across as well, is the idea of hope for the future. And obviously I don't want to make every single story I write kind of a moral lesson at the end type of thing. But leaving on a nice note with hope for the future, I think is intertwined in my story telling, and that's probably because of my childhood, in terms of watching 90s cartoons, which were probably the heaviest morally lessoned stories of all time, really. But I think that's, it's important to do that, to repeat that message over and over again, because we humans forget all of that stuff. Even if you know it, but you need to be reminded almost on a weekly, daily basis, these types of lessons, really. And that's what I'm hoping to do in my stories, I think.
Is there a difference between thinking for paper and thinking for digital in terms of production medium?
Yeah, I think there could be. I haven't thought of it. I tell you what, there is actually one example of where I changed something from the digital edition to the print edition for the first Milford Green series story, and that was because we had a particular splash page, or at least splash panel, on two particular pages, where the top panel was across two pages on the print version, and then for the digital version we changed that into one, like just two separate pages, because obviously you can't necessarily get that across digitally so well, and that was the only kind of consideration that comes to mind. But in terms of the future of comics, and obviously Comixology has a big hand in this, and I think one of the main things is guided view, and kind of how that works with comics. And I think you can definitely do things digitally that will be read in guided view that you couldn't necessarily do in just a regular print version, or just seeing the page all as one, digitally. So I think there's definitely space there in terms of trying to think how to change a story based on how somebody's reading a comic. And I tell you what is really interesting. So Scott McCloud did a TED talk. I think it was probably in about 2005 or something like that. You can search it on YouTube. It's on YouTube. Just Scott McCloud TED talk, and he does a really, really good talk about where digital comics are going. And I didn't know a lot of this stuff before, in terms of, at the time, kind of around 2005, people were really experimenting with digital comics in terms of creating like these crazy maps of digital comics. And I think we've still got a lot to learn from what Scott McCloud was saying 16 years ago. I'm going to explore that in the future for sure.
Do you find that thinking about guided view changes the calculus in how to keep people engaged and turning pages?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. Because obviously guided view is very, very is focusing on a panel at a time, rather than enveloping, like the reader actually taking in the entire page at the same time. So I definitely think that you need to, with guided view, you definitely need to be more impactful per panel rather than just the page as a whole, I think. So you'd probably have to have a faster pace with guided view, perhaps, because otherwise it's like, okay, another boring panel type of thing. Whereas as a page, you can perhaps kind of see that something exciting is coming, and so you'll read the panels. But if you're just going panel by panel through guided view, then it's I think it has to be a faster pace. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of considerations there.
So, how do you keep things fresh and interesting?
Yeah. Trying to keep things fresh and interesting. I like to challenge myself, I think. And I've really tried to have different stories in all of my titles, different types of stories. So obviously Milford Green, Victorian Space Adventure series, is very science fiction-y, and as is Access Denied as well. It's kind of, based in the future where you've got an android city on Mars and things. But then at the same time with Band of Warriors, that's, a historical comic. It's action adventure as well. And that's, a common thing as well, that it's kind of all mostly action adventure type of stuff. But obviously the actual kind of genres themselves are quite different. It's Band of Warriors is a historical one. And so, no science fiction within there, and mythology as well in the mix there. And then you got Project Hoax as well, which I mentioned earlier, which is a horror comic. Horror is obviously quite different to those as well. So keeping things fresh, I'm really trying to put my hand to almost every genre going. And I do eventually want to do, almost every genre out there possible. Trying to see if I can turn my hand to any genre. In terms of other elements of trying to keep things fresh, I think it's trying to search for new knowledge as well, to try and come up with new ideas to bring in to those genres as well. So the idea of Access Denied came from a news story about artificial intelligence, and how it could one day take over. And it's an old story. The fact that artificial intelligence could one day take over the entire planet and enslave us. But I thought, what would happen if the artificial intelligence just said, you know what, I don't want to be on this planet anymore, and the artificial intelligence took all of its androids and things like that and just went off to Mars. And then that's what Access Denied is, where the artificial intelligence on Earth just said, I don't want to be on this planet anymore, I'm out of here, and just went to Mars. And so, trying to expand your knowledge, I think, keeps it fresh too.
What inspires you?
People inspire me, definitely. Some of the things that people are capable of is absolutely incredible. From a creative team making a story that blows your mind, to somebody being able to unicycle whilst juggling knives or something like that, and even magic tricks as well. Magicians inspire me as well. It's like, wow, you must have spent so much time to be able to do that. I know it's a trick, but it feels like it's real magic. But it inspires me that somebody would put the amount of time it requires to make you feel like it's magic, even though you know that it's a trick. People inspire me. It's amazing what people are capable of.
That's awesome. So above and beyond comics, you've also got some really fun podcasting going on.
Yes, absolutely. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing you for my podcast, which is called Comics for the Apocalypse. And for anybody that hasn't come across it just yet, I interview on a weekly basis guests about what comics they would take into an apocalypse. We've had the likes of Heather Antos, Rachel Smith. And that actually came from the idea of, so we've got a radio program in the UK called Desert Island Discs that's been going for, gosh, it must be 50 years now, this program. But what they do is that they interview people from all facets of life about what music tracks, what discs they take onto a desert island with them. And, they are, which 8 tracks rather they take onto a desert island with them. And through that interview, they kind of go through their life story as well. It's a fantastic program if you've never listened to it before. And, they've had everybody on, a lot of well-known people from, who has been on there recently? Ricky Gervais, of course, and Stephen Fry, Emma Thompson, and all the film and TV people you can think of, and also kind of prominent scientists and things like that as well. It's really interesting. But the idea for Comics for the Apocalypse came from that. I thought, how can we do that but with comics? And Comics for the Apocalypse came to mind. It's a lot of fun. So folks out there, just search for Comics for the Apocalypse in your podcast app and have a listen.
Nice. So you're still actively reading comics as we speak?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Totally active reading comics. In fact, I was just reading the first volume of Meta Barons today, and that was based off of a recommendation on the show, on my podcast. And that's another great thing about the podcast, is that I find out about so many comics that I've never heard of. And I find out a lot of the history as well, which is fantastic, because obviously I came to comics late in my early 30s, and I've got a lot to catch up on. But this podcast really helps out.
Nice. So do you have a particular issue or story or title of all time?
Yeah, my favorite is The Walking Dead. I think that Robert Kirkman and Charlie Adlard just did an absolutely fantastic job in terms of creating a story that could go that long and keep you interested. Of course, like with anything like that, it'll go slow at some points, but you kind of, if you've got a series that long, you kind of have to do that almost to make things exciting, because they can't be, fast paced all of the time. And the idea, obviously, from probably from Robert's perspective, is that, you've got to show the mundanity of how life could be as well in that scenario. But I think The Walking Dead's got it all, from, laugh out loud moments to exceedingly scary moments, moments that make you think about your own life, and also other people's lives as well. I think The Walking Dead has got it all.
We're heading up on the end of the show, and now we get to do the fun part, the lightning round, all of the crazy questions. Awesome. Are you ready?
Ready to rock.
Awesome. So let's start with an easy one. Do you have a favorite food?
My favorite food is eggs.
Really?
Yeah. I just love eggs.
Wow.
I know. Random.
Would you say you're a cat person or a dog person?
Dog person.
What's something that brings you joy?
My daughter. She's an absolute joy. 3 years old and mad as a hatter.
Love it. That's amazing. If you could change one detail about life on planet Earth today, what would it be?
Right now, there's a fairly easy answer, and that would be to completely remove COVID from the planet.
There you go. There you go. That would work. So 100 years from now, NASA takes your lifetime of creative output, throws it into a space capsule, launches it into deep space, and sometime later, it could be a year, it could be a century, it could be longer than that, a race of aliens finds it and they consume your media. What do they think of it? What's their thought?
That's a great question, Eva. And I think their overall thought was, this guy's probably got a lot of issues, but my golly, he wants to see a better world, and he's trying to give people hope for the future. Again, yeah, I think they'd probably think that this guy's got a lot of issues, but he's trying his best.
So what's next for the adorable Sam London?
Next, I've got more Band of Warriors to write. We're just coming up to the end of creating the first issue. Myself and the artist Federico. That's almost finished, and then I'm finishing up issue 2, the script for it, and then the Kickstarter will be coming out probably June or July. But before that, actually in the next 2 or 3 weeks as we speak, the oversized hardback edition of the entire Milford Green series will be coming to Kickstarter through the month of April. And we haven't collected all of the installments just yet, and this is going to be the first time that it's collected in one book, but it's going to be oversized, which is fantastic, because I can't wait to kind of hold it as a big book. It's gonna look absolutely fantastic. And we've got Michael drew a new cover for that one that kind of imbues all of the installments of the Milford Green series. So yeah, that'll be coming to Kickstarter soon, which will be very exciting. And then I've got some stuff that I can't quite talk about just yet, that I'm working on as well. So watch this space and make sure you follow me on Twitter if you want to find out about that in the future.
It's amazing. That all sounds just like so much fun.
It really is, and for the most part, this really started out as a bit of a hobby, and it's almost a part-time job these days, which is fantastic. But I just absolutely love trying to create good stories, and just trying to bring a message of hope to people.
Nice. So where can people find you online?
Best place is Twitter, of course, and it's Samuel G. London. You can find me at, but I'm also on Instagram as well under that same handle, and then I've also got my own comics label called Signal Comics, and you can go to that website, signalcomics.com, and then if you want to check out all the titles, you can go to our Etsy store from there, and you can also obviously search for me on Comixology and all the usual places too.
And that's it, my babies. It's time to close the show. I wanted to thank you for being gorgeous, being valid, and for living your best life. We couldn't do this show without you, and you are appreciated. This episode has been part of Batch 37. Titular Characters is a show about the things we love. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. The dreamy announcer guy for the introduction is Donnie Underwood, and he is awesome. So have you thought about supporting the show? There are tons of ways to do it. You can show your support by following me at Eva is Adorable on Twitter, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, CastBox, or Podchaser, and if you feel like you would like to help out the show financially, you can visit us at buymeacoffee.com/Eva is Adorable, because I am. There, you can donate as little as $1, and all proceeds go towards the costs of producing and hosting this show. Every little bit helps, and you are amazing for even considering it. Anyway, babies, that's all we got. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. Oh, and when you do, bring candy. Love yas.